He lived in a mansion but wore rags on the streets, searching for something money couldn't buy. Only one woman saw past his disguise to his humanity. A wealthy CEO's deception becomes a journey to his soul when a hospital nurse shows him what real compassion looks like. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain poured mercilessly over the streets of Boston that winter evening. Alexander Thornton hunched his shoulders against the downpour, his expensive wool coat and tailored suit safely stored away in the trunk of his parked Bentley 3 blocks back. Instead, he wore tattered jeans, a stained sweatshirt, and a worn beanie pulled low over his brow. The stubble he'd carefully cultivated over the past week completed his transformation. At 42, Alexander had everything society deemed valuable. The multi-billion-dollar investment firm he'd built from nothing now occupied the top floors of the city's most prestigious skyscraper. His name graced the donor walls of museums, hospitals, and universities across the country. Yet something had been gnawing at him for months, a hollowness that no acquisition or achievement could fill. "Another night of this experiment, and then I'm done," he muttered to himself, shuffling along the sidewalk with the practiced gait he'd perfected over the past 3 weeks. His board members would have cardiac arrest if they knew their CEO was wandering the streets disguised as a homeless person. But Alexander needed answers to questions that had plagued him since his last charity gala. The memory of that night still burned. Standing at the podium, accepting yet another humanitarian award, he'd looked out at the sea of designer gowns and tuxedos, and felt nothing but emptiness. Later, overhearing a conversation in the restroom, Thornton just throws money at the poor for the tax write-offs. He's never spent 5 minutes with the people he claims to help, had struck him like a physical blow. The words had wormed their way into his conscience and wouldn't leave. So he devised this experiment. 3 weeks living periodically as a homeless man, observing how the world treated those without wealth or status. The results had been sobering. People averted their eyes as he approached. Security guards chased him from building entrances. Even servers at restaurants where he regularly dropped thousands refused him access to their restrooms. Tonight's rain made everything worse. Soaked to the skin, Alexander felt the first shivers of genuine discomfort. This wasn't the controlled discomfort of his luxury gym's ice bath or a challenging ski run. This was the relentless misery of having nowhere warm and dry to escape to, at least not if he maintained his cover. He spotted the bright lights of Massachusetts General Hospital ahead. Perhaps he could warm up in the emergency waiting room for a while. The security would eventually ask him to leave, but it might buy him an hour of respite from the storm. Inside, the fluorescent lights seemed blinding after the dark streets. Alexander shuffled toward a plastic chair in the corner, avoiding eye contact with the reception staff. His plan was to attract as little attention as possible. He didn't notice the woman watching him from the nurse's station. Elena Mercer had been on shift for nearly 12 hours. At 35, she'd been a nurse at Mass General for over a decade, primarily in the emergency department. She'd seen everything from gunshot wounds to stubbed toes, but she never lost sight of the humanity behind each injury. "Who's that?" she asked Michael, the security guard making his rounds. "Just another homeless guy, looking for shelter from the storm," Michael replied with a shrug. "I'll give him the usual 30 minutes, then move him along." Elena studied the man more carefully. Something about him seemed different. Most of their regular homeless visitors knew the routine, greeting staff by name and making themselves comfortable. This man sat stiffly, his shoulders tense despite his slumped posture, and though his clothes were soaked and dirty, his hands were remarkably clean, his nails well maintained. "I think I'll check on him," she said, ignoring Michael's raised eyebrow. Alexander stared at the floor, counting the minutes of warmth before inevitable ejection. He didn't notice someone approaching until a pair of comfortable but well-worn sneakers entered his field of vision. "You look soaked through," a gentle voice said. "Would you like a cup of coffee?" Alexander looked up, startled. The woman before him wore dark blue scrubs with an ID badge that read Elena Mercer, RN. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held none of the dismissal or disgust he'd grown accustomed to these past weeks. "Thank you," he managed, suddenly forgetting his practiced hoarse voice. Elena noticed the slip, but said nothing. "Cream or sugar?" "Black is fine." Another mistake. He should have requested sugar for the calories, as a genuinely homeless person might. When she returned with the coffee, she also carried a sandwich wrapped in plastic. The cafeteria was closing. They were going to throw this away, but it's perfectly good. It was a small kindness, but after weeks of being treated as invisible, it hit Alexander with unexpected force. He accepted the offerings with genuine gratitude. Thank you. This is very kind. Elena sat in the chair beside him, maintaining a respectful distance but not the exaggerated space others kept. I'm Elena. What's your name? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Alexander had prepared for this. Jack, he replied, giving the alias he'd chosen for his experiment. Nice to meet you, Jack. Rough night to be caught in the rain. Yes, he agreed, sipping the coffee. It was hospital quality, barely passable, but the warmth spreading through his hands felt like luxury. Do you need medical attention, or just a place to warm up? The question was professional, but delivered with such authentic concern that Alexander found himself momentarily speechless. In 3 weeks, not a single person had asked about his welfare with such sincerity. Just getting warm, he finally answered. I don't want to cause trouble. Elena waved away his concern. You're not causing trouble. That's why we have a waiting room. She glanced at the clock. Michael usually enforces a 30-minute limit, but I'll talk to him. You can stay until the rain lets up. Before Alexander could thank her, a trauma call came through the emergency room doors, and Elena was on her feet. Duty calls. Eat your sandwich, Jack. Alexander watched her rush toward the incoming gurney, her movements efficient and purposeful. For the next hour, he observed the emergency department's controlled chaos, with Elena at its center. She moved from patient to patient, her manner changing to match each person's needs, firm with a belligerent drunk, gentle with a frightened child, respectful with an elderly woman. Not once did she change her demeanor based on what appeared to be a patient's social status. The well-dressed businessman with chest pain received the same professional care as the disheveled woman mumbling to herself in the corner. When the department quieted again, Elena returned to check on him. Still raining out there, but it slowed down. How are you doing, Jack? Alexander had finished the sandwich long ago. Better, thank you. I should probably go before I overstay my welcome. Where will you go? The question wasn't judgmental, just concerned. Alexander had a prepared answer about a shelter, but something in Elena's direct gaze made lying suddenly difficult. I'll find somewhere, he said vaguely. Elena seemed to make a decision. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a card. There's a place 3 blocks east of here, St. Mark's Community Center. They've got overnight accommodations that are cleaner and safer than most shelters. Tell Brother Marcus that Elena sent you. Alexander took the card, genuinely touched. Why are you helping me? The question slipped out before he could stop it. Not something his homeless persona would likely ask. But Elena didn't seem to find it strange. Because you're a human being having a hard time, she said simply, and because someone helped me once, when I needed it. Alexander felt something shift inside him. In his world of calculated networking and strategic philanthropy, such straightforward compassion was almost foreign. Thank you, he said, meaning it more than she could know. When he finally left the hospital, the rain had indeed lessened to a drizzle. Alexander didn't head to St. Mark's, of course. Instead, he walked back to his car, changed into his regular clothes in the privacy of the tinted windows, and drove to his penthouse overlooking the harbor. But that night, lying in his king-size bed with its custom mattress and $1,000 sheets, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Elena, about the sandwich she'd saved from being thrown away, about the way she'd spoken to him as one human to another, without condescension or fear. The next morning, in his corner office with its panoramic views, Alexander found himself distracted during a major client meeting. Alex, you with us? His COO asked after he'd missed a direct question. Sorry, Mark. Mind-wandering. He refocused on the presentation, but Elena's words kept returning to him. Because you're a human being having a hard time. When was the last time anyone had seen him that way? As simply a human being, not Alexander Thornton, CEO and billionaire philanthropist. That evening, despite telling himself his experiment was concluded, Alexander found himself back in his homeless disguise, sitting in the emergency waiting room. He told himself he was just gathering more data, but he knew the truth. He wanted to see Elena again to understand what made her different. She wasn't at the nurse's station when he arrived. For nearly an hour, he sat watching the doors, feeling a strange disappointment. Perhaps it was her night off. Perhaps he should leave. "Jack? You're back." He turned to find Elena standing beside him, a look of concern on her face. Today, her hair was in a braid, and she looked tired, with faint shadows under her eyes. Yes. Alexander hadn't prepared an explanation. "Are you feeling okay? Do you need to see a doctor?" Her eyes scanned him professionally. "No, I'm fine. He searched for a plausible reason. "Yesterday was the first time in a while someone treated me like a person. I guess I wanted to feel that again." The truth tumbled out before he could stop it. Elena's expression softened. "Did you try St. Mark's?" Alexander felt a flush of guilt. "It was full," he lied. Elena seemed to accept this. "I'm about to take my dinner break. The cafeteria food is pretty awful, but there's a decent sandwich shop across the street. Would you like something?" Again, her kindness caught him off guard. "You don't have to do that." "I know, I'm offering." She smiled, and Alexander noticed a small dimple in her right cheek. "What do you like? Turkey? Ham?" "Turkey would be great," he said, reaching instinctively for his wallet before remembering it wasn't in these tattered clothes. "I'll be back in 15, Elena said, already heading for the exit. When she returned, she carried 2 sandwiches and 2 bottles of water. "Let's sit outside," she suggested. "There's a small courtyard where staff sometimes take breaks." Alexander followed her to a quiet garden area with a few benches. In the evening light, surrounded by carefully tended plants, Elena looked different than she had in the harsh fluorescence of the ER. Softer, younger somehow. "So, Jack," she said, unwrapping her sandwich, "what's your story?" Alexander had crafted an elaborate backstory for his homeless persona. A former construction worker, injured on the job, medical bills leading to financial ruin, then divorce and depression. He'd rehearsed it carefully, but now, facing Elena's genuine interest, the fabrication felt wrong. "It's complicated," he hedged. Elena nodded. "It usually is." "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. "What about you?" Alexander finally asked. "How long have you been a nurse?" 11 years at Mass General, she replied. "Before that, 2 years at Boston Medical Center." "You must have seen a lot." A shadow crossed her face. "Too much sometimes. But also amazing things. Babies born. Lives saved against impossible odds. People at their most vulnerable finding strength they never knew they had." Alexander found himself genuinely interested. "What made you become a nurse?" Elena took a sip of water before answering. "My brother got sick when I was 12. Leukemia. He spent almost 2 years in and out of hospitals. The doctors were important, of course, but it was the nurses who got us through day by day. They taught me how to help care for him, explained what was happening in terms I could understand, made sure my parents remembered to eat and sleep." She paused, a faraway look in her eyes. "When he finally went into remission, I knew what I wanted to do with my life." "Is he okay now, your brother?" Elena smiled. "He's great, married with 2 kids. Works as a high school science teacher in Chicago." Alexander felt a strange envy for this unknown man, with his ordinary, precious life. For the clear purpose his illness had given his sister. "You're lucky to have such a clear calling," he said quietly. Elena studied him. "What did you do before?" The partial truth felt safer than a complete lie. "Finance," Alexander said. "I was good at it, but I'm not sure it was ever a calling." "Not many jobs are," Elena said. "But you can find meaning anywhere if you look for it." Their conversation was interrupted by Elena's pager. She checked it and stood quickly. "I need to get back. Multi-car accident coming in." She gathered their trash, then hesitated. "Will you be okay, Jack?" Alexander nodded. "Thanks to you, I will." As he watched her hurry back into the hospital, Alexander felt something unfamiliar stirring within him. A mixture of admiration, curiosity, and something deeper he couldn't quite name. For the next 2 weeks, Alexander continued his charade, appearing at the hospital every few days as Jack. Each time, Elena would spare whatever moments she could to talk with him. Sometimes just a quick hello and a coffee. On slower nights, longer conversations in the courtyard. He learned that she lived alone in a modest apartment with a cat named Einstein. That she volunteered at a free clinic on weekends. That she loved murder mysteries and classic rock and could recite entire scenes from The Princess Bride from memory. In turn, he shared carefully edited versions of his own interests. His love of sailing. His collection of first-edition books. His terrible cooking skills. Each truth he revealed made the deception weigh heavier, but he couldn't seem to stop himself from returning. What began as an experiment had become something else entirely. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Alexander was connecting with someone who knew nothing of his wealth or power. Someone who saw only the person he was beneath all the trappings. In his real life, board meetings and investment decisions continued, but they felt increasingly hollow. One afternoon, he found himself staring at the proposal for a new homeless shelter his foundation was funding, thinking of Elena's simple kindness compared to his detached philanthropy. "Is something wrong with the plans, Alex?" His foundation director asked when he fell silent during the presentation. Alexander looked up from the architectural renderings. "Have any of us actually spoken to the people who will use this shelter? About what they really need?" The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. "I want to pause this project," Alexander announced. "I think we need more input from the community we're trying to serve." His executive team exchanged concerned glances, but no one contradicted him. That evening, Alexander returned to the hospital as Jack. It had been 3 days since his last visit, and he felt an unexpected nervousness. Would Elena be there? Would she be glad to see him? She was at the nurse's station when he entered, her face lighting up with recognition as she spotted him. The warmth of her smile caused a flutter in his chest that both pleased and alarmed him. "Jack, I was wondering if you'd come back," she said, approaching him. "I had some things to take care of," he said vaguely. Elena studied his face. "You look different today. Less tired." Alexander felt a moment of panic. Had his disguise slipped? But Elena's next words reassured him. "That's good. Are you staying at St. Mark's regularly now?" He nodded, adding another lie to the growing pile. "When they have space." "I'm glad." She glanced at the clock. "I actually get off in 20 minutes. Would you want to grab a real dinner? There's a diner around the corner that's decent." The invitation surprised him. "Are you sure? I mean..." He gestured at his disheveled appearance. Elena's eyes held his. "I'm asking you, Jack, not your circumstances." 30 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a vinyl booth. Alexander had carefully maintained his homeless persona, but he could feel his careful performance slipping as Elena shared stories about her day, her laugh making him forget the role he was playing. "You know," she said as they finished their meals, "you're not what you seem, Jack." Alexander froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "What do you mean?" Elena leaned forward slightly. "Your vocabulary, your knowledge of financial markets, the way you analyze things. You were educated somewhere good. And sometimes you forget to hunch your shoulders or rough up your voice." Alexander set down his cup, heart pounding. "Elena, She held up a hand. "I'm not asking for explanations. Everyone has their reasons for where they are in life. I've learned not to judge. Her kindness, her willingness to accept him even with the inconsistencies she'd noticed, made the deception suddenly unbearable." "What if..." Alexander began, then stopped, uncertain how to continue. "What if what?" Elena prompted gently. What if I'm not who you think I am at all?" The words came out barely above a whisper. Elena studied him for a long moment. "Then I'd wonder why someone would pretend to be homeless. And I'd hope they had a good reason." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Alexander could feel his carefully constructed experiment crumbling around him. He'd set out to observe humanity from a different perspective, but instead had found himself face to face with a truth he hadn't expected. Authentic connection couldn't be built on lies, no matter how well-intentioned. "I think I should go," he said abruptly, standing. Confusion and hurt flashed across Elena's face. "Jack, wait." "Thank you for dinner," he said. "And for everything these past weeks. You've shown me more kindness than you know." Before she could respond, he turned and walked quickly out of the diner, the bell above the door jangling accusingly as he escaped into the night. Back in his penthouse, Alexander paced the expansive living room, the city lights twinkling below through floor-to-ceiling windows. The contrast between this life and the one he'd been playing at struck him with new force. What had begun as an experiment in understanding had become something far more complicated. He had genuine feelings for Elena, admiration, respect, and something that felt dangerously close to love. But their entire connection was built on a foundation of deception. He'd pursued this masquerade thinking he would learn about how society treated its most vulnerable members. Instead, he'd learned something far more personal: how empty his own life had become, despite all his success, how hungry he was for genuine connection. Elena had given him a gift, seeing him as simply a human being, without status or expectations. Now he had to decide what to do with that gift. The next morning, Alexander arrived early at his office, determined to lose himself in work and forget the uncomfortable truth he'd confronted in the diner. His assistant looked surprised when he strode through the door at 7 a.m. "Mr. Thornton, you're not on the calendar until 9. Your breakfast meeting with the Singapore investors." "Cancel it," Alexander interrupted. "Cancel everything today." "Sir?" Her perfectly maintained professional mask slipped slightly. "I need time to think, Sarah. No calls unless it's an emergency." He closed his office door firmly behind him, ignoring her concerned expression. Alone in his corner office, Alexander stood at the window, gazing out at the city awakening below. Somewhere out there, Elena was probably finishing her night shift, heading home to her modest apartment, perhaps wondering why Jack had fled so abruptly. His phone buzzed. A text from Mark, his COO. "Singapore team already in town. Cancellation would jeopardize $50 million deal." "Reconsider?" Alexander sighed. The real world wouldn't pause for his moral crisis. "Give me an hour," he texted back. He settled at his desk, trying to focus on the briefing documents. But his mind kept returning to Elena. Her compassion wasn't performative or strategic. It was simply who she was, a stark contrast to the calculated goodwill that characterized his own charitable efforts. When his intercom buzzed, Alexander answered with barely concealed irritation. "I said no interruptions." "Sir, there's been an incident at the Thornton Foundation's downtown project," Sarah replied, her voice tense. "Channel 7 News is covering it live." Alexander grabbed the remote, turning on the wall-mounted television. The screen filled with images of protesters outside a fenced construction site, the very homeless shelter his foundation was building. "We're live downtown," the reporter was saying, "where advocates for the homeless have gathered to protest what they're calling development without representation." The Thornton Foundation's new shelter project has come under fire after the demolition of an unofficial encampment displaced over 30 people with nowhere else to go. The camera panned to show police officers escorting people away from the site, some carrying plastic bags containing their possessions. Alexander felt physically ill. How had he not known about this? A young woman with a megaphone appeared on screen. "Thornton builds luxury towers with one hand and tears down our homes with the other. Where are we supposed to go while they spend months building their showcase charity project?" Alexander reached for his phone, dialing his foundation director. "David, what the hell is happening downtown?" "Alex, we're handling it." David's voice was carefully controlled. "The site clearance was scheduled months ago. The proper notices were posted." "Notices? These people don't have mailboxes, David." Alexander ran a hand through his hair. Who authorized the demolition without ensuring everyone had somewhere to go? A pause. You did, Alex. The timeline was in the project brief you signed off on. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had approved this, probably without reading the fine print, trusting his team to handle the details while he focused on the big picture. The big picture that looked so good on charity gala posters and annual reports. Stop everything, Alexander ordered. I'm coming down there. 30 minutes later, his driver pulled up a block from the protest. Alexander straightened his tie, preparing to face the consequences of his disengagement. As he approached, a strange feeling overcame him. For weeks, he'd walked these same streets unrecognized in his homeless disguise. Now, in his bespoke suit, he felt more like the imposter than he ever had as Jack. The protesters noticed him immediately. A murmur ran through the crowd, followed by shouts. It's Thornton himself! Where are we supposed to sleep tonight, Mr. Billionaire? Before he could respond, movement near the police line caught his attention. A familiar figure in blue scrubs was speaking intently to an officer, gesturing toward an elderly man sitting on a bench nearby. Elena. Alexander froze. What was she doing here? The protest was blocks from the hospital. He watched as she knelt beside the elderly man, checking what appeared to be a bandage on his arm. Even here, in the middle of chaos, partly of Alexander's making, she was caring for those in need. One of the protest organizers approached Alexander, megaphone lowered. Mr. Thornton, we've been trying to meet with your foundation for months. No one will listen. Alexander tore his eyes away from Elena. I'm listening now. For the next hour, Alexander did something he realized he should have done from the beginning. He listened to people explaining that the shelter's proposed rules would exclude those with pets, that the location was far from the community services many relied on, that the institutional design made many feel unsafe. While he listened, he was acutely aware of Elena moving through the crowd, tending to minor injuries, handing out water bottles. She hadn't noticed him yet, and Alexander felt both relief and disappointment. When she finally turned and saw him, her expression shifted from surprise to confusion to something unreadable. Their eyes locked across the crowd, and for a moment, the chaos around them seemed to still. Then someone called for her help, and she turned away, leaving Alexander with the uncomfortable certainty that she had recognized him not as Jack, but as Alexander Thornton, the billionaire whose foundation had created this crisis. As the protest leader continued explaining the community's needs, Alexander made a decision. We're going to pause this project, he announced. Completely redesign it with your input. The woman looked skeptical. We've heard promises before. This isn't just a promise. Alexander pulled out his phone, calling his foundation director on speaker. David, I need emergency housing for 30 people, starting tonight. Hotels, whatever it takes. And tomorrow, we're convening a community design committee with decision-making power. Alex, that's not how we operate. It is now, Alexander interrupted firmly. Make it happen. When he hung up, the protest leader was watching him with guarded hope. Why the sudden change, Mr. Thornton? Alexander looked across the crowd, seeking Elena, but she had disappeared. Let's just say I've recently seen things from a different perspective. By evening, Alexander had arranged temporary accommodations for everyone displaced by the demolition and scheduled an emergency board meeting to restructure the foundation's approach to community projects. He'd also managed to avoid any interaction with Elena, though the near miss had left him shaken. Back in his penthouse, he poured himself a rare glass of scotch and tried to decide what to do. He could simply never return to the hospital, as Jack let Elena believe whatever she might about the strange homeless man who had disappeared from her life. It would be cleaner that way, safer. But the thought left him feeling hollow. His phone chimed with an incoming email from his assistant. Press coverage of today's protest resolution attached. Crisis management team suggests public statement tomorrow. Alexander opened the news link without much interest, then sat up straighter. There, in a photo of him talking with the protesters, was Elena in the background, looking directly at the camera. The caption identified her as, quote, Elena Mercer, Mass General Nurse and Homeless Advocate. His heart raced. She wasn't just at the protest by coincidence. She was involved, an advocate. Had she recognized him as Jack? The thought that she might have known all along seemed both impossible and strangely plausible. Alexander knew what he had to do. The deception had gone on long enough. The next evening, He drove himself to Mass General, parking in the public garage rather than having his driver drop him off. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks, neither the disguise of Jack nor the power suit of Alexander Thornton. At the front desk, he asked for Elena Mercer. "Are you a patient?" the receptionist asked. "No, just a friend," Alexander replied, the word feeling both inadequate and presumptuous. "I'll page her." "Your name?" Alexander took a deep breath. "Alexander Thornton." He waited in the lobby, heart-pounding, rehearsing explanations that all seemed insufficient. When Elena appeared, her expression was carefully neutral. She wore the same blue scrubs he'd grown familiar with, her hair in its practical ponytail, but she suddenly seemed like a stranger. "Mr. Thornton," she said formally, "how can I help you?" No recognition of Jack in her eyes. Either she hadn't made the connection, or she was a better actor than he had been. "Could we talk privately?" he asked. "Just for a few minutes." Elena hesitated, then nodded. The courtyard should be empty. They walked, in uncomfortable silence, to the small garden where they had shared sandwiches and conversations. In the evening light, with the scent of flowers around them, Alexander was struck by how many of his most honest moments in recent memory had happened in this simple space. "I saw you at the protest yesterday," he began. "Yes." Elena sat on a bench, her posture guarded. "I volunteer with Street Health Alliance. We provide basic medical care to the homeless community." Alexander nodded. "What you did, it was impressive. I just bandaged a few cuts. The real issue is people losing the only shelter they had." Her voice held a challenge. "I know. That's why I've halted the project for redesign, with actual community input this time." Elena's expression softened slightly. "That was the right thing to do." Alexander took a seat on the bench, leaving space between them. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you." "About your foundation's approach to homeless services?" "Number about Jack." Elena went very still. "What about Jack?" Alexander met her eyes directly. "I'm Jack." For a long moment, Elena simply stared at him. Then understanding dawned on her face, followed quickly by disbelief and something that looked painfully like betrayal. "That's not possible," she said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. "The first night, you brought me coffee, black, and a sandwich the cafeteria was going to throw away." Alexander's voice grew softer. "You told me about your brother's leukemia, how the nurses helped your family through it, how he's a science teacher in Chicago now." Elena stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "Why would you do something like that? Was it some kind of sick game?" "No," Alexander said quickly. "It wasn't a game. It started as an experiment. I wanted to understand how the world treats people without wealth or status. An experiment." Elena's voice was flat. "So all those conversations, those moments when I thought I was helping someone in need, that was just research for your next charity project?" The hurt in her voice cut deeper than Alexander had expected. "It didn't stay that way," he said quietly. "After that first night, I kept coming back because of you, because you saw me. Not my money or my company or what I could do for you, just me." "I saw Jack," Elena corrected. "A person who didn't exist." "Jack is more real than Alexander Thornton has been in years," he admitted. "With you, I could just be myself without all the expectations, the performance of being a CEO and philanthropist." Elena shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. "Do you have any idea how manipulative that was? How violated I feel, knowing you were lying to me the entire time." "I do now," Alexander said, the full weight of his deception finally clear to him. "And I'm sorry, more sorry than I can express." Elena was silent for a long moment, processing. "The diner," she finally said. "You left suddenly because I started questioning who you really were." Alexander nodded. "I realized I couldn't keep lying to you, but I didn't know how to tell you the truth. So why tell me now?" "Because I saw you at the protest. Because I realized that whatever connection we had formed, even though it was based on a lie from my side, it changed me. It made me see how empty my approach to helping others has been." Elena studied him, her professional assessment mode engaged despite her anger. "And what exactly are you hoping to get from this confession, Mr. Thornton?" The formal address stung, but Alexander recognized he deserved it. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect us to pick up where Jack and Elena left off. I just thought you deserved the truth, even if it means you'll hate me for it." "I don't hate you," Elena said after a moment, "but I don't know you either. The real you." "I'd like a chance to change that," Alexander said, hope flickering despite himself. "The real me is some combination of Jack and Alexander. I'm still figuring out exactly what that looks like." Elena's pager beeped. She checked it with a sigh. "I have to get back." Alexander stood. "I understand." As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Elena?" She paused, looking back. "Thank you for showing me what genuine compassion looks like." A complex emotion crossed her face. "Goodbye, Mr. Thornton." Alexander watched her disappear back into the hospital, the weight of his choices sitting heavy on his shoulders. He had told the truth, but it had cost him the one genuine connection he'd formed in years. The next morning, Alexander shocked his executive team by announcing a complete restructuring of the Thornton Foundation. Community representatives would be added to the board. All projects would require input from those they intended to serve. And he would be taking a more hands-on role, not just signing checks but understanding the actual impact of their work. "This is a radical departure from our established protocols," his foundation director protested. "Our established protocols led to a PR disaster and, more importantly, hurt the very people we claim to help," Alexander replied firmly. "We're changing course." Over the following weeks, Alexander threw himself into the transformation. He convened listening sessions with homeless advocates. He visited existing shelters to understand their strengths and weaknesses. He brought experts in trauma-informed design to revamp the shelter plans. But despite his full calendar, he found himself constantly thinking of Elena. He had respected her space, making no attempt to contact her after their confrontation in the courtyard. But her absence left a void that his newfound sense of purpose couldn't quite fill. 1 month after their last meeting, Alexander was reviewing architectural plans with a community advisory group when his assistant interrupted. "Mr. Thornton, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent." Alexander looked up, irritated by the interruption, until his assistant added, "And Elena Mercer?" His heart skipped. "Send her in." The meeting participants exchanged curious glances as Elena entered the conference room. She was dressed in jeans and a simple blouse so different from the scrubs he was accustomed to seeing her in. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, looking uncomfortable as all eyes turned to her. "We were just wrapping up," Alexander said quickly, though they had been mid-discussion. "Could everyone give us the room for a few minutes?" Once they were alone, an awkward silence fell. Alexander spoke first. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I didn't expect to come," Elena admitted. "But I've been following what you're doing with the foundation. The changes you've made. The community engagement." Alexander nodded. "Your words that night in the courtyard, they stayed with me." "I saw you yesterday," Elena continued, "at St. Mark's Community Center. You were helping serve meals." Alexander felt a flush of embarrassment. "You were there?" "I volunteer there twice a month. I was in the back when you arrived." She paused. "You weren't doing it for publicity. There were no cameras, no press. Just you, serving food, and talking with people." "It's the least I can do," Alexander said simply. Elena took a step closer. "Why?" "Because you were right. About all of it. My philanthropy was detached, theoretical. I was solving problems from a distance, without understanding the actual needs of real people. And now," Alexander considered the question carefully, "now I'm trying to listen more than I speak, to use my resources not just to build buildings or fund programs, but to amplify the voices of people who know what they actually need." Elena studied him with the same directness that had unsettled him during their first meeting in the emergency room. "The man I knew as Jack was thoughtful, humble, and genuinely interested in people's stories. Was any of that real?" "All of it," Alexander said without hesitation. Jack gave me permission to be the person I'd forgotten how to be. Someone who could just connect with another human being without agenda or expectation. Elena moved to the window, looking out at the city below. I felt betrayed when you told me the truth. I questioned every interaction we'd had, wondering what was real and what was performance. I understand, Alexander said quietly, but then I started noticing the changes in your foundation's approach. The way you've been engaging with the homeless community. It made me wonder if perhaps Jack wasn't entirely a fiction, if maybe he was the part of you that got buried under boardrooms and balance sheets. Hope flickered in Alexander's chest. That's what I've been trying to figure out. How to integrate Jack's perspective into Alexander's reality. Elena turned back to face him. I'm still angry about the deception. I probably will be for a while. I understand, Alexander repeated, trying to hide his disappointment. But, Elena continued, I'd like to see where this goes. Alexander stared at her, not quite comprehending. Where? What goes? This foundation restructuring, this new approach to community engagement. She hesitated. And maybe, eventually, us, whatever that might mean. Alexander felt something expand in his chest. Possibility, hope, connection. I'd like that too, he said softly. But I don't want to rush things. I need to earn back your trust. Elena nodded. St. Mark's needs volunteers for their health clinic this weekend. Mostly intake forms and basic vitals, nothing requiring medical training. Are you asking me to volunteer alongside you? I'm suggesting a place where Alexander and Jack might start to become the same person, Elena replied. For the first time since his deception had been revealed, Alexander smiled. I'll be there. As Elena turned to leave, she paused at the door. One more thing, Alexander. Yes, no more disguises, no more experiments. Just be honest about who you are and what you're trying to learn. I promise, he said, meaning it completely. After she left, Alexander returned to the window, looking out at the city with new eyes. For years, he had viewed Boston from the remove of his penthouse or corner office, seeing patterns and possibilities, but not the individual stories that made up its true character. Elena had given him a second chance, not just at whatever might develop between them, but at becoming the person he wanted to be, someone who could use his privilege and power, not as a wall to separate himself from others, but as a bridge to connect resources with real human needs. The road ahead wouldn't be simple. Regaining Elena's trust would take time. Transforming his foundation would face resistance. Changing himself would be the hardest task of all. But for the first time in years, Alexander felt fully present in his own life. The hollow feeling that had driven him to his homeless disguise had been replaced with something more substantial, a purpose grounded not in abstract philanthropy, but in genuine human connection. Saturday morning arrived with gentle spring sunshine, warming the weathered brick exterior of St. Mark's Community Center. Alexander parked his modest Audi rather than his usual luxury car, feeling oddly nervous. This would be his first time volunteering alongside Elena since their conversation in his office. He'd dressed carefully in jeans and a plain button-down, clothes that were neither the rags of Jack nor the power suits of CEO Alexander Thornton. As he approached the center, he spotted Elena outside, clipboard in hand, directing other volunteers. She wore her hair down today, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Without her hospital scrubs, in simple jeans and a t-shirt bearing the clinic's logo, she looked different but somehow more herself. "You came," she said when she spotted him, her tone conveying mild surprise. "I promised I would," Alexander replied simply. Elena nodded, handing him a volunteer badge. "We're setting up in the main hall. I've got you on. Intake, greeting people, helping them complete their forms, making them feel comfortable." "I can do that," Alexander said, though in truth, he felt less prepared for this than for multi-billion-dollar negotiations. The community center's main hall had been transformed into a makeshift clinic. Folding tables created reception areas and privacy screens partitioned examination spaces. Medical volunteers in scrubs arranged equipment while others organized paperwork and supplies. "Have you done anything like this before?" Elena asked as she showed him to his station. "Not exactly," Alexander admitted. "Most of my foundation work has been from a distance." "That's why you're here," she said with a small smile. "To change that." For the first hour, Elena stayed nearby, guiding Alexander through the intake process. He watched how she interacted with each person, making eye contact, listening attentively, offering reassurance. Gradually, he began to mirror her approach. "You're a natural," she commented when he successfully helped an elderly Spanish-speaking man complete his forms, using the few Spanish phrases Alexander remembered from college. "I had a good teacher," he replied, glancing at her. By midday, the clinic was bustling. Alexander had met people from all walks of life. The working poor, unable to afford regular health care, the chronically homeless with untreated conditions, elderly individuals confused by Medicare paperwork. During a brief lull, he found himself helping a young woman with a sleeping toddler on her lap. "I just need his vaccinations updated for preschool," she explained quietly, trying not to wake the child. "I work 2 jobs, but neither offers health insurance." Alexander nodded, helping her with the paperwork. "How old is he?" 3 in August, she said, smoothing the boy's hair. "He's my whole world." As Alexander processed her forms, he realized this woman, not much older than 25, was working 60 hours a week, raising a child alone, and still couldn't access basic health care without a free clinic. All the statistics and policy papers he'd read about healthcare inequality suddenly had a face. When Elena stopped by his station, Alexander pulled her aside. "The foundation should be funding more of these clinics," he said quietly. "Regular ones, not just occasional events. People shouldn't have to wait for a special Saturday to get basic care." Elena studied him, something softening in her expression. "That's exactly right. But it's not just about throwing money at the problem." "I know," Alexander agreed. "It's about sustainable systems, community involvement, addressing root causes. But while we work on those bigger issues, people need help now. See? You're learning." The smile she gave him felt like a small victory. By late afternoon, exhaustion had set in. Alexander had been on his feet for hours, focusing intently on each person who came to his station. Yet, despite his fatigue, he felt more energized than after any day in his executive office. As they cleaned up after the last patient left, Brother Marcus, the center's director, approached Alexander. "Elena tells me you're interested in expanding healthcare access," the older man said, extending his hand. "We could certainly use the support." Alexander shook his hand firmly. "I'd like to learn more about what you're doing here and how my foundation might help, not by imposing our ideas, but by supporting your existing work." Brother Marcus raised an eyebrow, glancing at Elena. "That's not the approach we usually get from wealthy donors. Typically, they arrive with predetermined plans and expect gratitude for their generosity." Alexander felt a flush of embarrassment, recognizing his former approach in that description. "I'm trying something different," he said. "Learning first, acting second. A revolutionary concept in philanthropy." Brother Marcus said with a wry smile. "Let's talk next week. I have some ideas that could use backing from someone with your resources and your newfound perspective." After Brother Marcus walked away, Elena approached. "That went well," she said, helping Alexander fold the last table. "He doesn't impress easily." "Thanks for suggesting this," Alexander said. "It's one thing to read reports about healthcare gaps and another to sit across from people actually experiencing them." Elena nodded. "That's what I was hoping you'd see." She hesitated. "A few of us usually grab dinner after these clinics. Nothing fancy, just the pizza place around the corner. Would you like to join us?" The invitation felt like another small step toward rebuilding trust. "I'd like that very much." The pizzeria was crowded and noisy, nothing like the exclusive restaurants Alexander typically frequented. He found himself squeezed into a booth with Elena and 3 other volunteers, eating slices from shared pans and drinking beer from plastic cups. The conversation flowed easily. Stories from the day's clinic, discussions about healthcare policy, and occasional personal anecdotes. Alexander mostly listened, struck by the passion these people brought to their volunteer work. "So, Alexander," said Michael, a physician's assistant, "Elena tells us you're restructuring your foundation's approach to community work. What prompted that?" Alexander felt all eyes turn to him. He glanced at Elena, wondering how much she had shared about his experiment as Jack. Her slight shake of the head confirmed she had kept his secret. I realized we were making decisions about people's needs without actually involving them in the process, he said carefully. It was arrogant and ineffective. What changed your perspective? Asked Sophia, a nursing student. Alexander paused, considering his answer. I had an experience that helped me see things differently. I started listening to people instead of just reading about them in reports. Under the table, he felt Elena's hand briefly touch his, a silent acknowledgement of his honest but discreet response. As the evening progressed, Alexander found himself relaxing into this new social context. These were people who valued contribution over status, impact over wealth. Their acceptance wasn't based on his net worth, but on his willingness to roll up his sleeves and help. When they finally left the restaurant, Elena walked with Alexander to his car. "Thank you for today," he said, "for giving me this opportunity." "You did well," she replied. "Better than I expected, honestly." Alexander smiled. "Low expectations make success easier." "Not low expectations," Elena corrected. "Just realistic ones. This is all very new for you." They reached his car, and Alexander hesitated, reluctant for the evening to end. "Would you like to get coffee sometime? Just the two of us, to talk about next steps for the clinic partnership." Elena considered him for a moment. "Is this a business meeting or something else?" "Both, maybe?" Alexander admitted. "I enjoy your company, Elena. I learned from you. And yes, I'd like to discuss how to support St. Mark's properly. But I also just want to spend time with you." "Wednesday evening," she said after a pause. "There's a coffee shop near the hospital called Groundwork. 7 o'clock? "I'll be there," Alexander promised. As he drove home, Alexander reflected on how differently this Saturday had unfolded compared to his typical weekends of exclusive social events or solitary luxury. He felt tired but fulfilled in a way that was entirely new. Wednesday arrived with unexpected complications. A major client threatened to pull their investment over the foundation's new direction, claiming the community-centered approach lacked the prestige they wanted associated with their brand. "This is exactly the problem," Alexander told his executive team. "They see our work as a branding exercise rather than actual impact." "Their investment represents $20 million annually," his CFO reminded him. "Then we'll find it elsewhere," Alexander replied firmly. "Our new direction isn't negotiable." The meeting ran long, leaving Alexander barely enough time to make it to the coffee shop. He arrived 15 minutes late, slightly breathless, to find Elena already seated with 2 cups on the table. "I'm so sorry," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Crisis at work." "I figured," Elena replied, pushing one of the cups toward him. "I took a chance on black coffee, no sugar." Alexander smiled at the reference to their first interaction in the emergency room. "Perfect, thank you." "Everything okay at the office?" Elena asked. "Just resistance to change. It's to be expected." Alexander took a sip of coffee. "How was your day?" 3 cardiac arrests, a major trauma from a car accident, and a child with a marble stuck in his nose," Elena replied matter-of-factly. "The usual." Alexander stared at her. "And you're still standing." "That's the job," she said with a small shrug. Her casualness about what sounded like an overwhelming day struck Alexander forcefully. While he'd been wrestling with spreadsheets and bruised egos, she'd been literally saving lives. "I've been thinking about our conversation at the clinic," he said, redirecting the conversation. "About sustainable healthcare access. I have some ideas I'd like to run by you." Elena leaned forward. "I'm listening." For the next hour, they talked about possibilities. A permanent clinic space near St. Mark's, partnerships with medical schools for staffing, advocacy for policy changes that would address root causes of healthcare inequality. "This could really work," Elena said, excitement creeping into her voice. "Especially with the medical school partnerships. Students need experience. Communities need care. It's synergistic." "That's what I thought," Alexander agreed. "And if we can demonstrate success with one location, we could expand the model." Their discussion flowed naturally from healthcare access to broader issues of social inequality, from theoretical solutions to practical next steps. Before either realized it, the coffee shop was preparing to close. "I had no idea it was so late," Elena said, glancing at her watch. "I have an early shift tomorrow." As they walked outside, the spring evening had turned chilly. Without thinking, Alexander removed his jacket and draped it over Elena's shoulders when he noticed her shiver. "Thank you," she said, looking slightly surprised by the gesture. They stood there for a moment, the city noise creating a backdrop to the strange intimacy that had developed between them. A connection forged first through deception, but now growing through shared purpose. "This was nice," Alexander said finally. "The conversation, I mean, working on something meaningful together." Elena nodded. "It was." She hesitated, then added, "It's strange. In some ways, I feel like I've known you for months, but in others, you're still a complete mystery to me." "Ask me anything," Alexander offered. "No more secrets." Elena considered this. "Why finance? What drove you to build your company in the first place?" The question caught Alexander off guard. Most people ask about his success or wealth, not his motivations. "Security, initially," he admitted. "My family lost everything when I was 16. Banking collapse, bad investments. My father never recovered from it. Psychologically, I mean. I swore I'd never be vulnerable like that." "And you certainly achieved that," Elena observed. "I did, but somewhere along the way. Accumulating wealth became an end in itself rather than a means to security. Status replaced purpose." Alexander shook his head. "Until recently." "Until Jack," Elena said quietly. "Until you," Alexander corrected. "Jack was just the disguise. You were the catalyst." The air between them seemed to shift with this acknowledgement. Elena looked away, adjusting his jacket around her shoulders. "I should get going," she said. "Early shift. Can I walk you to your car?" She nodded, and they walked in comfortable silence through the nearly empty streets. At her modest sedan, Elena slipped off his jacket and returned it. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "For listening to my ideas, for taking them seriously." "Thank you for giving me another chance," Alexander replied. "I know I didn't deserve it." Elena studied him for a moment. "Maybe we should stop keeping score of who owes what to whom. Just move forward with what we're building." "I'd like that," Alexander said softly. Elena hesitated, then reached up and kissed his cheek quickly. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, Elena." As he watched her drive away, Alexander touched his cheek where her lips had brushed his skin. Something was shifting between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of something new built on more honest foundations. Over the next few months, Alexander threw himself into the clinic project. He met regularly with Brother Marcus and a committee of community healthcare advocates, listening more than speaking. The plan evolved into something far more comprehensive than he had initially envisioned. Not just a clinic, but a community wellness center with preventative care, education, and social services. Elena remained involved, though carefully maintaining professional boundaries. Their coffee meetings became a regular occurrence, focused primarily on the project but occasionally venturing into more personal territory. Alexander learned about her childhood in a middle-class neighborhood in Providence, her struggle to pay for nursing school, her dream of someday opening a mobile clinic for underserved rural communities. In turn, he shared more of himself, his lonely years building his company, his gradual disconnection from any sense of purpose beyond wealth accumulation, his growing desire to create meaningful change. The Foundation Board ultimately approved the Wellness Center project with a 5-year funding commitment. The day the final plans were submitted for permits, Alexander texted Elena, "We did it. Permits filed today. Construction starts next month." Her reply came quickly, "Congratulations, this will change lives." Alexander stared at his phone, feeling both pride in their accomplishment and disappointment at her formal response. After a moment's hesitation, he typed again, "Dinner to celebrate? Your choice of restaurant." This time, her response took longer. "Okay. Tomorrow? 7 p.m.? Giacomo's in the North End." Alexander smiled. Giacomo's was a tiny, unpretentious Italian restaurant with perpetual lines and no reservations accepted, about as far from the exclusive establishments he typically frequented as possible. The next evening, Alexander arrived early to secure a place in line. By the time Elena arrived, he had already waited 45 minutes. "You actually stood in line?" she asked, looking genuinely surprised. "You said your choice," Alexander replied with a shrug, "though you might have warned me about the wait." "I thought Alexander Thornton would pull some strings. Make a call," Elena teased. "Isn't that how billionaires operate?" "Not this one, not anymore," he said, meeting her eyes. "I'm learning patience has its rewards." The restaurant was cramped and noisy, their table so small their knees occasionally brushed underneath. They ordered family-style huge plates of pasta to share, house wine in simple glasses, fresh bread for sopping up sauce. "This is the best bolognese I've ever had," Alexander admitted, savoring another bite. "Better than that place in Milan you mentioned? The one with the Michelin stars?" Elena asked, referring to a story he'd shared about a business trip. "Much better," Alexander confirmed. "Though don't tell my Italian investors I said so." As they shared tiramisu for dessert, Elena asked, "Do you miss it? The old life? The exclusivity, the luxury, the power plays?" Alexander considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. When wealth and status are your only metrics, decisions are easier. This new path, really listening, collaborating, questioning my assumptions, it's harder. But no, I don't miss who I was becoming in that world." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "And Jack? Do you miss him?" "Parts of him," Alexander admitted. "The freedom of anonymity. The way people responded to me as just another human being, not a walking bank account." He paused. But Jack wasn't sustainable. He was a persona, not a solution. "So who are you now?" "Not quite Jack, not quite the old Alexander." "I'm still figuring that out," he said honestly. "But I like who I'm becoming, especially when I'm with you." The words hung between them, more direct than anything he'd said since his confession. Elena's expression softened, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. "I'm sorry," she said, checking the screen. "It's the hospital. There's been a multi-car pileup on the interstate. They're calling in all available staff." She looked up apologetically. "I have to go." "Of course," Alexander said immediately. "Let me take care of the check and walk you out." Outside, as Elena prepared to leave, she turned to him. "Thank you for tonight. For everything you're doing with the Wellness Center. It matters. It matters because you showed me what matters," Alexander replied simply. This time, when Elena kissed his cheek, her lips lingered a moment longer. "We'll continue this conversation," she promised before hurrying to her car. 2 weeks later, the groundbreaking ceremony for the Wellness Center took place. Community members, medical partners, and foundation staff gathered at the site. Alexander had insisted on keeping the event small and focused on the community rather than on himself or his foundation. As he prepared to make brief remarks, he spotted Elena near the back of the crowd. She gave him an encouraging nod. "Today isn't about laying the first stone of a building," Alexander began. "It's about acknowledging that the real foundation was laid by this community long before we arrived, through resilience, mutual support, and wisdom about what true wellness means." He continued, crediting the community committee and healthcare partners who had shaped the project, deliberately minimizing his own role. As he spoke, he noticed Elena smiling, and knew she recognized this was not the same man who had once viewed philanthropy as a branding exercise. After the ceremony, as people mingled with refreshments, Brother Marcus approached Alexander. "Quite a journey from that first day at St. Mark's," the older man observed. "You've changed." "For the better, I hope," Alexander replied. "Indeed." Brother Marcus glanced toward Elena, who was chatting with some nursing students. "Though, I suspect the catalyst for that change is standing over there." Alexander followed his gaze. "She helped me see things differently." "Love has a way of doing that," Brother Marcus said casually. "I never said anything about love," Alexander protested too quickly. Brother Marcus merely smiled. "You didn't have to. Later, as the crowd thinned, Elena made her way to Alexander's side. Nice speech, especially the part where you didn't name-drop a single celebrity donor or mention how many millions you've contributed. I'm learning, Alexander said with a smile. They walked together toward the perimeter of the site, looking out at what would soon become the wellness center. I've been thinking about our conversation at dinner, Elena said suddenly, before I got called away. Which part? Alexander asked, though he knew exactly which moment she meant. The part where you said you like who you're becoming when you're with me. She turned to face him directly. I like who I'm becoming with you too. Alexander's heart quickened. What does that mean for us? It means I've moved past the deception, Elena said carefully. It means I see who you truly are now. Not Jack, not the billionaire, but Alexander, the man who stands in restaurant lines and listens to community feedback and cares enough to change. And that man is someone you could. Alexander hesitated, afraid to presume too much. Someone I'm already falling for, Elena finished for him, her voice soft but certain. Alexander took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Despite everything, the lies, the complications, the different worlds we come from? Because of everything, Elena corrected. The journey matters, Alexander, even when it starts with a wrong turn. Looking into her eyes, Alexander saw what he'd been searching for long before he'd put on Jack's tattered clothes. Genuine connection, purpose beyond wealth, the chance to be valued for who he was rather than what he possessed. I love you, Elena, he said simply. I think I have since that first night in the emergency room when you treated a supposedly homeless man with the same dignity you'd give anyone else. I think I've been falling for you across two identities, she admitted with a small smile, which is quite a feat. When he kissed her, there on the site of what they were building together, Alexander felt something settle within him, the disparate parts of himself, Jack and Alexander Thornton, finally merging into a single, authentic whole. 6 months later, the wellness center opened its doors. Alexander stood back, watching as community members explored the new facility. Bright, welcoming spaces designed with their input, staffed by professionals who reflected the community's diversity. What do you think? Elena asked, joining him after showing nursing students around the education center named in honor of her brother. I think it's just the beginning, Alexander replied, taking her hand. Together they had expanded their vision beyond this single center. The Thornton Foundation, now with Elena on its board, was developing similar projects in other underserved areas. Alexander had sold his penthouse, moving to a modest but comfortable home in a diverse neighborhood where, as he put it, people say hello on the street. Elena had reduced her hospital hours to split her time between emergency medicine and directing the wellness center's preventative care program. Their different backgrounds and experiences had become complementary strengths rather than obstacles. As they watched a grandmother bringing her grandchildren for checkups, a homeless man receiving care with dignity, and medical students learning a community-centered approach to healthcare, Alexander squeezed Elena's hand. You know what the strangest part is? He said quietly. What's that? I pretended to be homeless to learn about other people's humanity, but ended up discovering my own. Elena leaned against his shoulder. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves to find ourselves. Or be found by someone who sees us clearly, Alexander added, kissing the top of her head. Outside the center stood a simple plaque, easily overlooked among the modern design elements. It read, True wealth is measured not by what we possess, but by what we give. True sight comes from seeing the humanity in every person we meet. It was signed simply, In Gratitude, A.T. A reminder of a journey that began with deception but ended in truth. A wealthy man who pretended to be homeless, and the kind nurse who had seen his humanity before she even knew his name. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.